What if the person you saved became the one thing you could never live without? The rain was relentless that night, falling in silver sheets, hammering the tin roofs of a small village at the edge of Jaipur. The streets were nearly empty, except for one young man running through the storm, clutching a folded piece of paper that was already dissolving in his hand. His name was Arav, 24, a quiet mechanic with oil-stained fingers and eyes that carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid words. He ran because of what he had seen, because of what he knew was about to happen. Inside a whitewashed house at the far end of the lane, a girl was being prepared for marriage. Her name was Mira, 19, the daughter of a silk merchant whose reputation meant more to him than his child's heart. The house glowed with the yellow light of 100 marigold lamps. Women chatted. Gold bangles clinked. Somewhere a sitar hummed softly, a melody that should have been beautiful, but tonight it felt like a funeral song. Mira sat still in front of a mirror, her reflection almost foreign to her. Layers of red silk wrapped around her body like chains. The air smelled of rosewater and resignation. Outside, thunder cracked the sky. Arav stopped at the gate, soaked to the bone, breathing hard. He could see through the window. Mira's eyes, hollow and distant, the way a person looks when they've already given up. They had known each other once, not as lovers, not yet, but as two people caught between worlds. He fixed her father's car. She would sometimes bring him tea, curious about the quiet boy who never looked her in the eye. They shared fragments of conversation about the world beyond the village, about cities that never slept, about freedom. Then, one day, she stopped coming. Arav found out later why. Her father had arranged her marriage to a wealthy man twice her age, a landowner from another province. The deal was already sealed. The wedding set for the next morning, and that was why he ran through the rain. Why? His heart pounded like war drums in his chest. When he pushed open the gate, the noise startled the servants' heads turned. Her father's men moved toward him, their expressions dark. But Arav didn't stop. He stepped inside, dripping water onto the marble floor, his voice trembling but unbroken. Mira can't marry him. The room fell silent. The old man rose from his chair, his face hard as carved stone. And who are you to say what my daughter can or cannot do? Arav met his eyes. Someone who knows what she wants. Mira's hands tightened on the edge of her chair. For a moment, she thought she must be dreaming. No one had ever spoken for her before. Her father's men grabbed Arav by the arms, dragging him toward the door. He didn't resist. His gaze stayed locked on Mira's. You don't have to do this, he said. Not like this. Something cracked inside her then. The words she had swallowed for months finally tore free. Father, she said, her voice trembling. I don't love him. The man turned on her, eyes wide with disbelief, then fury. Enough, he said. This is not about love. But it had always been. That night ended in chaos, shouts, broken glass, the crash of thunder outside. No one remembers exactly how it happened, only that when the storm cleared, the two of them were gone. Gone into the night, into the wild unknown. The train they boarded before dawn was nearly empty. Mira sat by the window, staring at the endless fields rolling past, her wedding bangles still clinking faintly as she lifted her hand. Arav sat beside her, silent. The weight of what they'd done hung between them like fog. For the first time in her life, Mira could breathe. And yet, freedom came with a price she hadn't anticipated. Fear. What would her family do? Where would they go? What future awaited her, a girl who had run away from her own wedding? Arav had no answers, only a promise. We'll find a way, he said softly. Days turned into weeks. They ended up in a small city far from home, one of those places that smells of dust and diesel, where no one asks questions and everyone is running from something. Arav found work repairing scooters at a roadside shop. Mira, at first, stayed hidden in their rented room, afraid to step outside. But as time passed, she began to rediscover herself. She learned to cook simple meals, to walk the crowded streets without covering her face, to laugh again. She would sometimes wait for Arav by the shop, sitting on a wooden bench, watching him work. The way his hands moved, steady, patient, unafraid, made her heart ache in ways she didn't understand. They weren't lovers, not yet. There was too much uncertainty, too much unspoken between them, but there was warmth, and in that warmth, something began to bloom. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Mira found a stack of papers on the table, sketches designs for a workshop, a small one, with his name scribbled at the bottom. Arav's garage. You dream big, she said, smiling. He looked up, embarrassed. Maybe too big. No, she said quietly. Not big enough. It was she who pushed him to open his own shop. She sold the few pieces of jewelry she had left, the last remnants of her old life. Together, they rented a tiny corner near the marketer shed with a tin roof and uneven floors. They painted it themselves, red and white, with a wooden sign that read A&M Motors. At first, business was slow, but word spread about the young mechanic and the girl with fire in her eyes who handled customers like a pro. She learned everything: how engines worked, how to read invoices, even how to bargain with suppliers twice her age. Every night, after closing, they would sit on the curb, sharing a cup of chai, laughing about the day. And sometimes, when silence settled between them, their hands would brush. Neither of them would move away. Months passed, the shop grew. So did the unspoken bond between them. People started talking, whispering stories about the mechanic and the runaway bride. Some said she was foolish, others called her brave. But to Arav, she was something else entirely. The reason his world had color again. Then, one afternoon, the past came knocking. A black car pulled up outside their shop. A man stepped out, wearing a white kirtle that hadn't seen a speck of dust. Mira froze. It was her brother. The air shifted. Arav wiped his hands, standing tall. The man's voice was cold. "You've brought shame to our family," he said. "Father's been sick since the day you left. You think running away makes you free. It makes you nothing." Mira's heart pounded. Arav took a step forward, calm but firm. "She's not nothing. She's building something here, with me." The brother's eyes flicked between them, full of disgust. "You think this," he said, gesturing to the small shop, "is life. You'll regret it, both of you." And then he was gone, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than words. That night, Mira sat alone on the rooftop, watching the city lights shimmer like scattered stars. Arav joined her, sitting quietly beside her. For a long time neither spoke. Finally she whispered, "Do you ever wonder if we made a mistake?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Every day," he said, "but then I see you, and I know we didn't." She smiled through her tears. "I don't want to keep running, Arav. I want to stand still. I want to build something that lasts." And that was when she told him her idea. A repair school for girls. A place where they could learn what she had learned, build their own skills, their own independence. Arav listened, his eyes softening with pride. "Then we'll do it," he said simply. 2 years later, they did. The garage expanded into a small training center and workshop for women. Mira taught classes herself, her red bangles clinking as she worked with wrenches and tools. Local newspapers started writing about her, the girl who once ran from her wedding, now teaching other women to stand on their own feet. But the story wasn't over. Not yet, because even as they built a new life, something between them remained unspoken, a tension that neither dared to name. Every stolen glance, every touch that lingered a heartbeat to long it, was there, quietly waiting. One night, after the day's work was done, they closed up the shop and walked home through the narrow streets. The air warm and full of the scent of jasmine. Mira stopped, turning to him. "Do you ever think," she began softly, "that saving me changed your life?" Arav smiled faintly. "I didn't save you," he said. "You saved yourself." She shook her head. "No, Arav, you gave me the courage to try." He looked at her then, really looked at the girl who had become a woman, who had built a future out of ashes, and something shifted in the space between them. For the first time, he reached for her hand. The street was quiet, the world holding its breath. And then a distant sound broke the stillness. Tires screeching. A familiar black car turning the corner, its headlights slicing through the night. Mira froze. Arav's grip tightened. It couldn't be. Not after all these years, but the past has a way of finding those who try to outrun it. And as the car slowed to a stop just meters away, a shadow stepped out, one that neither of them expected to see again. The rain began to fall once more. The car's headlights carved white lines through the rain, slicing across the narrow alley like blades. Mira's breath hitched. Arav moved instinctively in front of her, shielding her without thinking, his hand still locked around hers. The engine idled, rumbling low, a beast waiting to pounce. Then the door opened. Out stepped a man, tall, lean, the kind of presence that carried quiet authority. The years had touched him, silver at his temples, lines around his eyes. But his voice when he spoke was unmistakable. Mira, her father. For a moment, everything stopped. The rain, the sounds of the city, even her heartbeat. She hadn't seen him in 5 years. Not since the night she vanished into that storm. She'd imagined this moment 100 times, what she'd say, how she'd stand tall, how she wouldn't let her voice tremble. But now, facing him, all those rehearsed words vanished like smoke. He looked older, not just in face but in spirit, as if the years had been heavier than time itself. His clothes were immaculate, but his eyes, they were tired. Arav's voice was steady. "Sir, it's late. You shouldn't be out here." Her father's gaze shifted to him, sharp as a broken glass. "You think I came here for you," he said. "I came to take back what's mine." The rain intensified. A bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the tension etched in every face. "I'm not yours," Mira said softly, her father's jaw tightened. "You will always be mine. You think this life you've built," he gestured at the narrow street, the flickering shop sign, the puddles reflecting fractured light. "This is what you left your family for." Mira took a step forward. Her voice didn't shake this time. "No," she said, "this is what I left fear for." A faint murmur of thunder answered her, distant but rolling. Her father's expression flickered, something between pain and disbelief. For a heartbeat, he looked less like a tyrant and more like a man who had lost something he didn't know how to mourn. He turned back to his car, his tone colder now. "Your mother's ill," he said without looking at her. "She asks for you every day. If you have any respect left for the woman who raised you, you'll come home." And with that he left, the car disappearing into the sheets of rain, taillights bleeding red into the darkness. Mira stood motionless long after the car was gone. Her heart felt like it was being pulled in two directions, one toward the life she had built, and one toward the life that still haunted her. Arav said nothing. He knew better than to interrupt a storm that wasn't his to calm. That night, she couldn't sleep. The rain drummed softly against the window, a rhythm that reminded her of childhood, of nights she'd stayed awake listening to her parents argue behind closed doors, of dreams she never dared to chase. She found herself sitting by the window until dawn, staring at the horizon. Arav came in quietly, setting a cup of tea beside her. He said, "She's sick." She murmured, "I heard." She turned toward him. "If it's true, I have to go." He hesitated, then nodded. "Then I'll come with you." The next morning, they took the first bus out of the city. The road back to her village was long and winding, the kind that felt like it was taking them backward through time. Mira sat by the window again, but this time her reflection felt heavier, older, more complicated. The village looked smaller than she remembered. The colors seemed muted, the air still thick with that familiar silence of unspoken judgment. Children paused to stare as they passed. A few old neighbors whispered. Her house was the same whitewashed structure, though the paint had begun to peel, the garden wild with weeds. When the door opened, her mother stood there, frail but smiling, the kind of smile that came from love deeper than pride. "Mira," her voice broke as she said it, and just like that, years melted away. Mira fell into her arms, sobbing quietly. Inside, the house smelled of incense and old memories. Her father wasn't there. He had gone to the temple, her mother said, perhaps intentionally. Arav stayed outside, giving them space. He leaned against the courtyard wall, watching the sky darken. He didn't belong here, and he knew it. Every sound, the distant clang of temple bells, the murmur of passers-by, reminded him of that invisible line that divided their worlds. But when Mira came out hours later, her eyes swollen from tears, she didn't look broken. She looked resolved. "She's better than he said," she whispered, "but she's lonely. He doesn't speak to her much anymore." Arav nodded. "Then we'll stay for a while." They rented a small room near the edge of the village, pretending it was temporary, but days stretched into weeks. Arav helped fix old bicycles and tractors. Mira visited her mother daily, helping with chores, cooking, sometimes sitting quietly beside her father without a word. Slowly, the ice between them began to crack. One evening, as she was leaving, her father stopped her at the door. His voice was quiet. "I saw your workshop on the news," he said. "The one for women." Mira turned, startled. "You did?" He nodded. "It's admirable. I never thought." He paused, the words heavy on his tongue. "You've made something of yourself." For a moment she saw a glimpse of something in his eyes, not approval, not yet, but understanding, the beginnings of it. But peace never lasts long in stories like this. A few days later, Arav received a letter, a property notice. Their workshop's landlord in the city had decided to sell the land. They had 1 month to vacate. It hit them like a storm. Everything they had built, their business, the training center, their dream, could vanish. Mira wanted to return immediately, to fight for it. But her mother's health had taken a turn for the worse. Arav stayed, torn between loyalty to her and the life they had created together. In those weeks, something changed between them. Not distance, but gravity. The unspoken bond that had always tethered them grew heavier, richer. Every glance carried a question neither dared to voice. What if we lose everything? What if all we have left is each other? One night, after visiting her mother, Mira found Arav repairing an old radio under a dim lamp. The air smelled of rain again. She sat beside him, silent for a while. "You could leave," she said finally. "Go back to the city. Save the workshop. He didn't look up and leave you here." She sighed. "You've done enough for me, Arav." That made him pause. He looked at her then, the way someone looks when they're trying to memorize a moment. "You still don't understand. Do you understand what?" "I didn't save you that night," he said. "I saved myself." The words lingered between them, electric, almost frightening in their honesty. "Because, before you, I was just surviving," he continued. "Fixing broken things, counting days that all looked the same. You gave me something to fight for." Mira's breath caught. The rain outside grew louder, drumming against the roof like applause. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. The silence said everything. The next morning brought news. Her mother had passed quietly in her sleep. The funeral was simple. No tears, no speeches, just the slow crackle of fire and the scent of sandalwood. Her father stood apart, stoic, but Mira could see it in his eyes, regret, deep and raw. After the ceremony, as the crowd thinned, he approached her. "Your mother wanted you to be happy," he said. "Even if it wasn't with us, it was the closest thing to forgiveness he had ever offered." Later that night, Mira sat outside, staring at the embers still glowing faintly in the pyre. Arav joined her quietly, sitting beside her without a word. She turned to him, tears glistening. "She used to tell me that love isn't about who saves who. It's about who stays." He reached for her hand. This time she didn't hesitate. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. The following day, they returned to the city. The workshop stood just as they'd left it, tools scattered, dust gathering on the counters. The wooden sign faded by the sun, but it still felt alive. They fought hard to keep it. Mira negotiated with the new owner, offering every rupee they had, even the land her mother had quietly willed to her before passing. The man finally agreed, but at a price that would drain them completely. Arav tried to stop her. "You'll lose everything." She smiled faintly. "Not everything." The deal was made. The workshop was theirs again. But rebuilding it would take time, money and strength they barely had. Yet when they reopened weeks later, women returned, some old students, some new, ready to learn again. In the evenings, Mira would stand outside, watching the sunset bleed across the rooftops, the air filled with laughter and the clatter of tools. Arav would join her, his hands stained with grease, his eyes soft with pride. "You know," she said one night, "when I first met you, I thought you were the one saving me." He smiled, "And now I think we've been saving each other all along." The moment lingered, gentle, quiet, almost sacred. But as the light faded, Mira noticed something strange. A letter pinned to the workshop door. No stamp, no signature, just her name. She unfolded it slowly. Her father's handwriting. Sharp, deliberate. "I was wrong about many things, but I was right about one. You were meant to lead, not follow. There is land in your mother's name. Use it well. Build something bigger than what I ever dreamed for you." She read it twice, her heart trembling. Arav looked at her questioningly. "What is it?" he asked. She smiled through her tears. "It's the beginning of something new." He took her hand, eyes searching hers. "Then let's build it." And for the first time, she realized freedom wasn't something you ran toward. It was something you built, one choice at a time, with someone who refused to let you face the storm alone. But even as they looked out across the city, the world shifting beneath their feet, neither noticed the figure standing in the shadows across the street, watching, waiting, a familiar face from a past they thought they had buried. The wind carried a whisper through the air. The storm, it seemed, wasn't over yet. The man in the shadows didn't move at first. He stood under the broken street lamp across from the workshop, a silhouette barely outlined by the amber glow of passing cars. His coat was long, dark, soaked from the drizzle that had begun to fall. From where Arav and Mira stood, he was just another stranger in the night. But he wasn't. He had been there before years ago, on the night they ran away. It took a few days before Mira noticed him again. At first, she thought she was imagining it, her figure lingering by the corner. A flicker of movement reflected in the workshop's glass door, footsteps that faded whenever she turned around. But the feeling of being watched grew heavier, like a hand pressing against her back. Arav dismissed it gently at first. "You've been under stress," he said. "Maybe your mind's still caught in the past." But one evening, as they locked up, he saw it too, a faint glow of a cigarette, burning red in the darkness near the gate. Someone was there, watching, waiting. He moved quickly, crossing the street. The figure turned and slipped away into the maze of alleys before Arav could reach him. Only the echo of boots on wet pavement remained. When he returned, Mira was standing by the door, her face pale. "You saw him, didn't you?" He nodded. "Who could it be?" "I don't know," Arav said quietly. "But whoever it is, they've been here before." The unease didn't leave them. The next morning, the first light of dawn found Mira sitting in the workshop, her fingers tracing the edges of her father's letter. There was something about his words that kept pulling at her. "Build something bigger than what I ever dreamed for you." It wasn't just an apology. It was a clue. When she looked closer, she saw faint imprints beneath the ink, like pressure marks left by a second note written on top of the same paper. She tilted it toward the light, and faint outlines appeared. Numbers, a land registry code. By noon, she had convinced Arav to drive out to the address. It was an hour outside the city, an old textile mill, long abandoned, its windows broken, its sign rusted beyond recognition. "This can't be right," Arav said, stepping out of the car. But Mira felt something pulling her forward, deeper into the silence of the place. The air was thick with dust and the scent of forgotten time. Inside, shafts of light pierced through holes in the roof, illuminating floating particles that shimmered like ghosts. In the center of the vast hall, a single object sat untouched by decay, a sewing machine, covered in a thin sheet. Mira lifted it carefully. Beneath it lay a small wooden box, locked. Arav frowned. "What is this place?" "My father used to own textile mills," she murmured, "before everything went wrong. He never spoke about this one." She kept the box with her, but for days, she didn't open it. Something about it felt personal, sacred even, as though the truth inside would change everything. Meanwhile, the workshop began to thrive again. Students returned, repairs increased, and Mira's name started spreading through local news, interviews, small awards, invitations to speak. Arav watched her with quiet pride, but also something deeper, a growing distance he didn't know how to bridge. Every time she stood before a crowd, speaking with fire in her voice, he saw her becoming someone larger than life, someone who didn't need saving anymore. And a small, unspoken fear began to take root inside him, that one day she might outgrow him completely. That night, as they closed the workshop, Mira placed the wooden box on the table. "I want to open it," she said. Inside they found a leather-bound journal and a faded photograph, her father as a young man, standing beside a woman who was not her mother. Mira's breath caught. The woman had her eyes. She opened the journal, flipping through pages of neatly written notes, records of purchases, shipments, And something else. Letters never sent. One caught her attention immediately. To my daughter, whom I have not yet met. A chill ran through her. The letter was dated 2 years before she was born. Arav read over her shoulder. What does it mean? She kept reading, her hands trembling. I built my empire from pride, not love. I married wealth when I should have chosen truth. The woman I loved, she left before you were born. If you ever find this, know that your life began with a secret I could not undo. The words blurred. Her father had loved someone else, a woman who might have been her mother. Which meant the woman she had buried, the woman who had raised her, may not have been who she believed. Her mind spiraled. The memories of childhood, her mother's gentle touch, her father's silence suddenly took on a different color. Everything she thought she knew about herself began to fracture. Arav tried to steady her. Maybe there's more to it. Maybe your mother knew, but Mira shook her head. No, she would have told me. She always told me the truth. The rain began again, faint at first, then harder. It beat against the roof, a steady rhythm that filled the silence between them. That night, Mira dreamed of her father standing in the doorway of the old house, calling her by a name she didn't recognize. When she woke, her pillow was damp with tears she couldn't explain. Over the following days, the sense of being watched returned. The figure appeared again near the alley. Once, Mira caught a glimpse of his face under the streetlight holder, scarred, with eyes that carried the weight of recognition. And then, one afternoon, a note was left at the workshop door. The truth about your family didn't die with your father. Meet me where it began. No signature, just those words. She showed it to Arav, her voice trembling. It has to be him, the man from the mill. Arav hesitated. It could be a trap or it could be the answer. They agreed to go together. The address led them back to the outskirts, to the same mill, but this time the gate was open. The air inside was colder than before. Their footsteps echoed through the vast emptiness until a faint sound broke the stillness, a cough, a voice. Mira from the shadows. The man stepped forward. He looked older than her father, but there was something familiar in his face, an echo of her own features. I knew you'd find this place, he said softly. You look like her. Like who? Your mother? My mother's dead, Mira said. He shook his head. Not the woman who raised you. The woman who left before you were born. Her stomach turned. Who are you? He smiled faintly. Your uncle, your father's brother. The world seemed to tilt. Arav stepped closer, his body tense. Why are you here? The man looked at Arav, studying him for a moment. Because your father wasn't the man you think he was, he said. And neither is the story you've been told. He motioned toward the far wall, where an old family photograph hung, half buried in dust. In it, 2 men stood side by side, her father and him holding a company banner. Beneath them, scrawled in faded ink, A&M Textiles. Arav froze. A&M, the man nodded. Your workshop's name. You think it was coincidence? The revelation hit like thunder. Arav looked at Mira, realization dawning. The initials they'd chosen, the ones they thought were theirs, had belonged to a family long before. The man continued. Your father didn't lose everything because of pride. He was betrayed. He built his empire with my help, but when I fell into debt, he took the blame to protect me. It destroyed his reputation. It destroyed everything. He spent the rest of his life trying to rebuild, to hide the truth from you. Mira could barely speak, and my mother. She left when the scandal broke. She thought she'd been betrayed by your father, when in truth it was me who caused it. He never told her the truth. He thought it would only bring her more pain. The silence that followed was suffocating. Rain dripped through holes in the ceiling, echoing in slow, uneven beats. Mira turned away, her mind reeling. Everything she had built, her purpose, her fight for freedom, had been rooted in a story of rebellion against her father. But now, she realized, she had been living out the legacy of a man who had spent his final years trying to protect her from his own mistakes. The man, her uncle, reached into his coat and pulled out another envelope. He left this for you. He told me to give it only if you found your way here. Mira took it slowly. Inside was a single page, her father's handwriting clear and deliberate. You once asked why I was so afraid to let you go. It wasn't because I wanted control. It was because I had already lost everything once. Your mother, my brother, my name. I couldn't bear to lose you too. If you've found this, it means you have the courage I never did. The courage to forgive. She folded the letter carefully, her tears falling silently onto the paper. Arav stood beside her, his hand brushing hers, grounding her in the moment. When they stepped out of the mill, the rain had stopped. The world felt different, quieter, but heavier. Back in the car, Mira stared out the window. Everything I thought I knew about him was wrong, she whispered. Arav's voice was soft. Maybe this is the truth you needed to see, that he wasn't your cage. He was your mirror. She turned to him, her eyes wet but steady. Then what does that make us, Arav? The ones who built our freedom from the pieces of their mistakes. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for her hand again, his thumb tracing slow circles against her skin. As the city lights came into view, Mira glanced at the rearview mirror. For a fleeting moment, she saw a reflection, a figure standing at the roadside, watching them pass. Her uncle, or maybe something else. She wasn't sure anymore what was real and what was memory. But one thought stayed with her, like a pulse beneath the silence. If the truth could rewrite her past, what would it do to her future? The rain began again, gentle this time, like a whisper of what was still to come. The rain whispered against the windshield as the car wove through the dark road back toward the city. Streetlights stretched like pale ghosts across the slick asphalt. Mira sat in silence, her father's letter clutched in her lap, her reflection blurred in the glass beside her. The air inside the car was thick, too heavy with what had been unearthed, too fragile for words. Arav kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The hum of the engine filled the void between them. Each passing kilometer felt like a thread unraveling of everything they thought they'd known about themselves, about each other, about the life they had built from ruin. Finally, she spoke. He wasn't the villain. Arav glanced at her. No, and my mother, she might still be alive. He nodded, but said nothing more. The headlights caught the glint of raindrops, turning them into sparks. Mira pressed her palm against the window, watching the world blur. When they reached the city, dawn was just beginning to break. The streets were still quiet, the sky bruised with the colors of morning. The workshop stood as they had left it, the sign glistening under the pale light. Everything seemed the same, yet nothing was. Inside, Mira placed the letter on the table beside the old journal. The air smelled faintly of oil and rain. She traced her father's handwriting with her fingertips, as though trying to feel the man behind the words. Arav leaned against the doorframe, watching her. There was something in her stillness that unsettled him, not weakness, but resolve. She wasn't breaking. She was transforming. What are you thinking? He asked. She didn't look up. I think I need to find her. Your mother? Yes. He took a step closer. We don't even know if she's alive, Mira, or where to start. She finally turned to him, her eyes steady. Then we start with what we have. That night they pored over the journal again. Between the ledgers and notes they found addresses, initials, fragments of old correspondence. One entry stood out, dated 22 years ago, marked with a name, R. Day. The handwriting beneath it read, "She left for Calcutta. If fate is kind, she'll forgive me one day." Mira traced the line with trembling fingers. R. Day. It could be Harav exhaled slowly. Then that's where we go. The decision hung between them like a dare. Neither knew what waited for them, their answers, ghosts or something in between, but the choice was made. The train to Calcutta left before sunrise 2 days later. The station was crowded, the air thick with the smell of chai and iron. Mira leaned against the window of their compartment, the rhythm of the wheels beneath them syncing with her heartbeat. Arav watched her quietly. Are you sure you're ready for this? She turned toward him. I've lived my whole life running from questions. Maybe it's time to start chasing them. Hours stretched into a blur of landscapes, fields drenched in monsoon mist, villages flickering by like fragments of a memory she never lived. The journey was long, silent except for the sound of the rails and the occasional whisper of wind through the open windows. By evening, the city swallowed them whole. Calcutta was alive in a way no other place was. Humid air thick with smoke and spice. Yellow taxis weaving through chaos. The constant hum of life that never stopped to breathe. They followed the only lead they had, an old address in the northern quarter, faded and nearly forgotten. It led them to a narrow lane lined with crumbling buildings, where the air smelled of rain and nostalgia. Number 47. A rusted gate, half covered in ivy. A woman in her 60s opened the door, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes sharp and alert. Can I help you? She asked. Mira hesitated. We're looking for someone named Ade. The woman's expression changed, subtle, guarded. Who's asking? I think she might be my mother. Silence fell. The woman studied her face carefully, as if searching for something long lost. Then she sighed and stepped aside. Come in. The house smelled of old wood and incense. Paintings lined the walls, portraits of women working at looms, sewing, teaching. On a shelf, framed photographs showed smiling faces, some faded by time. The woman gestured for them to sit. I'm Rena Day, she said, and if you are who I think you are, then you're late by 20 years. Mira felt the room tilt. You knew my father. I did, Rena said quietly. And your mother even better. She reached for a photograph on the table, two young women laughing together, arms around each other. One of them was unmistakably the woman Mira had called her mother all her life. The other looked exactly like Mira. That's her, Rena said. Her name was Ananya, your real mother. Mira couldn't breathe. The floor seemed to shift beneath her. She's alive. Rena's gaze softened. She was until 5 years ago. The words fell like stones. I'm sorry, Rena continued. She stayed here for years, quietly, after leaving your father. She never remarried. She taught at a women's collective. She wanted to find you, but she thought it was too late. Your father had told her you were better off without her. Tears blurred Mira's vision. The ache was deeper than grief. It was the ache of recognition, of realizing how close she had come to the truth so many times, yet missed it by inches. She left something behind, Rena said, reaching into a drawer. She handed Mira a small pendant, a silver locket, worn and tarnished. Inside was a photograph of a baby. You, Rena said softly. She carried that until the day she died. Mira closed her hand around it, the metal warm from Rena's touch. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Arav stepped forward, resting a hand on her shoulder. She leaned into him without speaking. Rena watched them quietly. She believed you'd become stronger than all of us. that you'd break the cycle that destroyed your family. Mira looked up, her eyes rimmed with tears. What cycle? Rena hesitated. Your father didn't tell you everything. The scandal that ruined him, it wasn't just business. It was about trust, betrayal. The factory wasn't just lost, it was taken. By someone close. Arov frowned. You mean the uncle? Rena's silence said everything. He wasn't your father's victim, Mira, she said softly. He was the one who sold the business out from under him. Your father took the blame to protect his brother's children. That's why he lost everything. Mira's breath caught. He lied to me. So did my uncle. Rena nodded slowly, because truth was heavier than shame. And now, that same man, your uncle, has come looking for you again, hasn't he? The room felt colder suddenly. The echo of rain outside grew louder, harsher. How do you know that? Arov asked. Rena's eyes darkened. Because he came here first. A silence stretched long and taut, broken only by the ticking of a clock. He was looking for the same journal you found, Rena said. Your father's records. He thinks there's something in there, something worth killing for. The room froze. Mira's mind reeled back to the night they'd found the box, to the feeling that someone had already been there, to the man in the shadows, watching. Why would he want it? Arov asked. Rena looked at Mira, her voice low. Because your father hid proof of what your uncle did. Evidence that could destroy everything he built afterward. If you have that journal, you're the only person standing between him and the truth. The words hung like thunder before a strike. Mira's pulse quickened. She reached instinctively for the bag by her side. The journal was inside. Rena's warning settled into her bones like ice. Outside, a car engine started. A faint vibration rattled the windows. Arov turned toward the sound, his jaw tightening. We have to go. Rena stepped closer, urgency in her eyes. He won't stop until he gets it. Whatever you do, don't go back to your workshop. It's the first place he'll look. But as they reached the door, Mira froze. That's where the girls are, she whispered. If he finds them, the rest didn't need to be said. Without another word, they ran into the storm. The city lights blurred through the downpour as their car sped through the streets. Mira's heart pounded, her thoughts tangled in panic and disbelief. She could see it now, the threads connecting everything. Her father's silence, her uncle's lies, the years of distance, the feeling of being watched. It had all been leading here. When they turned the final corner, the workshop came into view, its door ajar, light spilling faintly into the rain. Arov killed the engine. Stay here, he said. But Mira shook her head. No. They stepped inside together. The air smelled faintly of oil and smoke. Tools lay scattered across the floor. The sign above the counter hung crooked, its paint peeling from moisture. And there, near the back wall, the faintest sound of floorboard creaking. Arov's hand brushed hers. He's here. The next moment shattered the silence. A figure stepped out from the shadows, his face half lit by the flicker of a single bulb. The same man from the mill, her uncle. His eyes met hers, cold, unreadable. You found it, he said. Mira's voice trembled, but her spine was straight. You lied to me, he smiled faintly. I told you a version of the truth, the one you were ready for. Arov moved between them, his tone sharp. You used her family. You destroyed her father's name. Her uncle's gaze shifted to him. I built something better in its place. Mira reached for the journal. His eyes followed the movement instantly. I don't want to hurt you, he said quietly. But that book doesn't belong to you. Mira's pulse roared in her ears. The rain outside turned violent, hammering against the windows like fists. Arov took a step forward. Then you'll have to go through me. Her uncle's expression hardened. I was hoping you'd say that. He reached into his coat, and in that instant, the world seemed to hold its breath. The thunder cracked. The lights flickered. And somewhere between the flash and the darkness, Mira realized something she hadn't before. This wasn't just about her father's sins. It was about the price of truth and the bloodline it demanded to survive. The room filled with the electric silence of what was about to happen. Everything, the rain, the fear, the years of running, was leading to this moment. And then, the sound of a single footstep echoed behind them. They weren't alone. The air inside the workshop felt charged, every breath heavy with storm and memory. The flickering bulb painted fractured shadows across the walls, stretching them long and thin, like figures reaching from another time. Mira's uncle stood in the dim light, his eyes sharp as glass, his hand half hidden in his coat. Arov's body tensed beside her. Outside, the thunder rolled like a warning. Then came the sound again, a footstep. Slow, careful, from the back of the room. Arov turned, his jaw tightening, and Mira's heart lurched. Out of the darkness stepped a frail figure, wrapped in soaked clothes, a scarf clinging to her face. For a moment, no one spoke. The woman's eyes haunted, unflinching, locked on Mira's uncle. You've done enough, Rajan, she said quietly. Her voice broke the air like a blade. Rajan froze. His hand slipped from his coat. Mira's breath caught in her throat. The woman stepped closer, the light catching her face, and Mira felt the ground tilt beneath her. It was Rena, but not as she'd looked in the old house. Her face was stripped of warmth now, her eyes sharper, colder. What are you doing here? Mira asked, her voice shaking. Rena didn't look at her. Her gaze stayed locked on Rajan, finishing what I should have ended years ago. Arov glanced between them. You know each other? Rajan gave a bitter laugh. Of course she does. She's the one who helped your father hide the truth. The one who kept his secret safe all these years. Mira felt her stomach twist. You told me you wanted to protect my mother. I did, Rena said softly. But your mother wasn't the only one who needed saving. You were never supposed to find that journal, Mira. It was meant to stay buried with him. The rain pounded harder. The light flickered again. Why? Mira demanded. Why hide it? He was innocent. Rojan's laughter cut through the storm like metal scraping stone. Innocent, he said, stepping closer. You think your father was some martyr. He forged the evidence against me. He planned to ruin me after discovering I was going to marry your mother's sister. He couldn't stand the idea of me having what he lost. That's a lie, Mira spat. Rojan's eyes narrowed. He was obsessed with control. When your mother tried to leave, he locked her away. Rena knows. He was there. Mira turned to Rena, her chest rising and falling too fast. Tell me he's lying. Rena didn't answer immediately, her silence stretched, trembling. Then, in a voice that barely reached above the rain, she said, he's not. The world seemed to stop. The rain outside dulled to a whisper. The light hummed. Mira took a step back. You're saying my father? Rena nodded, tears in her eyes. He was a good man once, but grief changes people. When your mother tried to flee with you, he panicked. He didn't mean to hurt her, but he did. I helped her escape. I told him she'd drown so he wouldn't come looking. Mira's mind splintered under the weight of it. All the years of silence, the secrets, the shame, it was all tangled in this web of half-truths and desperate love. Rojan's voice softened, almost tender. You see now, niece, we're all stained by the same history. But Mira wasn't looking at him anymore. She was staring at the pendant around her neck, the one her mother had left behind. She opened it again, and there, beneath the photo of her as a baby, was something she hadn't noticed before, a folded piece of paper, pressed flat from time. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it. A few lines of her father's handwriting, faded but still legible. If she ever finds this, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I loved her mother, even when love became a cage. Mira's eyes burned. The page shook in her hand. He tried to make it right. Rajan sneered. Regret doesn't wash blood clean. But before anyone could move, Arav stepped forward, his voice steady. Neither does greed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something small, metallic, a recorder. He pressed play. Rojan's voice filled the room, distorted by static. She doesn't know what the journal really holds. Once I have it, no one will be able to prove what I did. The words echoed through the workshop like thunder. Rojan's face drained of color. He lunged forward, but Arav stepped between them, shoving him back. The struggle was brief, but brutal. Tools clattered to the floor, shelves toppled. Mira screamed as Rajan swung wildly, catching Arav across the jaw. Blood smeared his lip, but he didn't fall. He hit back, once, hard. Rajan stumbled, crashing against the workbench. The journal slid from Mira's hands, landing open on the ground. Pages fluttered in the draft, revealing sketches, signatures, documents, proof of the embezzlement Rajan had committed. The false ledgers he'd forged, the ruin he'd blamed on her father. Rajan saw it too. Desperation twisted across his face. He reached for the book. Mira stepped on it first. Her voice shook, but her eyes were fierce. It ends here. Rajan froze. Rain poured through a crack in the roof, streaking his face like sweat. For a moment he looked less like a villain, more like a man broken by his own lies. He lowered his hand. Then, slowly, he straightened. You don't understand, he said. That book will destroy everyone connected to us. The banks, the partners, the families who believed in your father. You think truth is clean, Mira. It burns everything it touches. Mira's fingers curled around the damp cover, then let it burn. For a heartbeat, the world held still. The rain fell harder. Rojan's breath trembled, and then he lunged again, this time for the oil lamp hanging by the wall. It fell, shattered, and the flames burst instantly across the wooden floor. Arav pulled Mira back as the fire spread, orange light swallowing the shadows. Rajan stumbled, coughing in the smoke. Rena screamed his name, but it was too late. The beam above him cracked, then collapsed. The fire roared. They barely made it out outside. Rain and fire warred in the storm. The workshop burned, bright against the black sky. Mira stood in the street, drenched and shaking, the journal clutched against her chest. Arav's arm was around her, holding her steady. Rena collapsed beside them, her face lit by the glow. He was right, she whispered. It destroys everything. Mira looked at the flames. For the first time, she didn't feel fear, only release. The building that had once been her sanctuary was now turning to ash, but somehow, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like truth finally had weight, and that weight was leaving her. Arav touched her hand. What now? She looked at him, her voice soft but certain. Now we rebuild. The word we lingered between them like a promise. By dawn, the rain had stopped. Smoke drifted over the skyline, mixing with the morning mist. The fire had taken the building, the lies, the years of buried guilt, but not them. They were still standing. Arav sat on the curb, his clothes torn, blood dried along his jaw. Mira knelt beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. The journal lay open between them, its pages singed, but not lost. She turned one over carefully, and there, on the last page, was a single line her father had written in handwriting more fragile than the rest. The heart never forgets who saved it. Mira smiled through her tears. He meant you, she whispered. Arav shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. No, I think he meant you. The sky lightened slowly, washing the city in pale gold. The chaos had ended, but its echo lingered soft, steady, alive. Rena stood at a distance, watching them. She looked smaller now, her strength spent. When Mira caught her gaze, she nodded once, a silent farewell or perhaps forgiveness. Then she turned and disappeared down the wet street, swallowed by fog. Mira looked after her, then back at the smoldering ruins. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel tethered to the past. She felt the pull of something new and written, uncertain, but hers. She reached for Arav's hand. Let's go home, she said. He glanced at the ruins, then at her. Where's that? She smiled. Wherever we start again. They walked away as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds. The smoke rose behind them like memory fading into light. The city began to stir, unaware of the story that had just burned itself clean. And as they turned the corner, the last ember from the fire flickered once, then vanished, leaving only rain and the quiet promise of something that might finally be called peace. But somewhere deep in the ashes, beneath the charred remains of paper and wood, a single page survived, the one with her father's seal unburned. The wind caught it, carried it into the morning air, and for a moment it looked almost alive, as if the story wasn't ending, only beginning again, in someone else's hands. The paper drifted through the air, curling like smoke, gliding on a breath of wind that smelled of rain and ash. It rose above the rooftops, brushed against the edge of a balcony, and vanished into the gold of the morning. Below, the city moved as if nothing had changed, vendors setting up stalls, trains howling in the distance, lives continuing with the quiet resilience of those who have learned to survive the storms. But for Mira, the world had shifted on its axis. Everything looked the same, yet every sound, every scent, every flicker of light carried a different meaning now. The truth had burned itself free, and for the first time, she could breathe without the weight of inherited ghosts pressing against her chest. They found shelter in a small cafe tucked into a narrow lane, the kind that smelled of cardamom and rain-damp wood. Arav sat opposite her, a faint bruise darkening along his jaw, his eyes fixed on the street beyond the glass. Neither spoke for a long while. Silence had become their language, not the silence of avoidance, but of recognition. Sometimes words only diluted what the heart already understood. Do you think love redeems people? He smiled faintly, not answering right away. Maybe not, he said finally. But it reminds them they're worth redeeming. The simplicity of it made her throat tighten. They left the cafe when the rain had thinned to a soft drizzle. The city smelled alive, earth, smoke, something sweet, baking somewhere unseen. Mira stopped at a newsstand near the corner and picked up a fresh notebook. Blank pages, clean beginnings. She tucked it under her arm like a promise. Over the next few weeks, life began to unfold again, gently, like a bud relearning how to open. They moved into a modest apartment above a tailor shop. The air smelled of fabric dye and chalk, the walls thin enough to hear laughter from the street below. Arav found work restoring old instruments for a music school nearby. Mira reopened her workshop in a small rented space near the river, starting again with 2 sewing machines and a handful of girls who had been waiting for her. The fire had taken much, but not the spirit that had built it in the first place. Each evening, as the sun bled over the water, she sat by the window, repairing old garments, saris torn from years of wear, coats that carried the smell of home. And as her hands worked the needle, she began to understand that every stitch was an act of forgiveness. Rena visited once, months later. Her hair had grown thinner, her step slower, but her eyes were still sharp. She brought with her a box wrapped in brown paper. It's all that survived from your father's office, she said, setting it down. Inside were a few charred pages, a pocket watch, and a photograph of Mira as a child, sitting on her father's lap, sunlight spilling across both their faces. Rena hesitated before leaving. He wasn't a monster, Mira, just a man who forgot how to carry his grief. When she was gone, Mira stood by the window, turning the watch in her palm. The glass was cracked, but the hand still moved. Time, it seemed, was merciful after all. That night, she took the surviving pages of the journal and the last words her father had written, and placed them inside the new notebook. Not to erase what had come before, but to let it rest. She wrote beneath it, "To those who loved imperfectly, may we learn to do it better." Mira looked at him, the glow of the lanterns catching in her eyes. "Then you did save me," she said softly. "Because I wouldn't have found myself without you." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally as if they'd always known how to find each other in the dark. The night carried on around them, the river murmuring, the distant sound of music, a dog barking somewhere down the lane. Ordinary, beautiful life. Later, as they stood on the terrace of their apartment, the city lights flickering beneath them, Mira closed her eyes and listened to the hum of the world. It wasn't perfect, it never would be. But perhaps that was what made it precious, the fragile, flawed persistence of love, of truth, of forgiveness. In the quiet, she thought of her father, not as the man who failed her, but as the one who tried to mend what he'd broken. Of her mother, whose courage had been love disguised as escape. Of Rena, whose lies had been the shape of protection. And of herself, a girl who once ran from the past and now walked freely toward the unknown. The stars were faint above the haze of the city, but she could still see them. Each one felt like a fragment of every story that had led her here, burning quietly, refusing to fade. She turned to Arav, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think hearts ever really belong to anyone?" He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. Maybe they just find each other for a while, long enough to remember what being alive feels like. The simplicity of it made her smile. "Then I'll remember this," she said. He leaned closer, his forehead against hers, and for a breathless instant, the world was only the rhythm of rain returning, soft and forgiving, washing everything clean. The following morning, the river carried with it the ashes of what had been scraps of burned wood, a single charred feather, perhaps even that surviving page now lost to the wind. Life moved forward, as it always did, unbothered by the weight of yesterday. But for those who had witnessed its fire, its rain, its quiet rebirth, something had shifted. Perhaps every story of rescue is really a story of return, not to the person who saved us, but to the part of ourselves that still believed we were worth saving. And with that, the camera would pull back, rising over the rooftops, over the river where the last golden light trembled, until all that remained was the horizon, quiet, infinite, alive. A question lingered in the air, too soft to answer, too human to ignore. What does it mean to be saved if not to finally see yourself unafraid, in the light?